Hello, everyone. My name is Marcella Walsh, Live Content Coordinator at AVIXA, and welcome to the first in our series, Smart Buildings Power Hour. September's webinar topic is Opportunity and Market. Joining us today is Bob Snyder, Editor-in-Chief, Channel Media, and publisher of SmartBuilding.News, Digital Signage News EMEA, European Solution Provider, and more. For the past 10 years, he has been the content chairman for the Smart Building Conference at ISE. Before I hand over the presentation to Bob, there are a few housekeeping items. For those viewing live, today's webinar qualifies for one CTS, CTSD, and CTSI RU credit. Please allow 5 to 7 business days to view on your transcripts. For any issues, please email webinars@avixa.org. The webinar will be approximately 45 to 60 minutes and all attendees will be placed on mute. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A window so today's moderator can address them at the end of the webinar. To access the Q&A window, simply move your cursor to the bottom of your live stream video box to locate the Q&A icon and click to open. Please do not enter questions into the chat window. You will have access to this recorded webinar at avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days. And now I will hand things over to Bob.
Thank you. Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for our Power Hour. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our speakers today. And hang on. There we go. But first, to suggest that we're going to be talking in this particular Power Hour about the opportunity and the market for the smart building market. Joining us today are Mike Bruin, CEO of Vanti, an award-winning creative technology company and a master systems integrator that designs and engineers intelligent technological solutions, transforming buildings into spaces that support, enable, and empower people. And by championing an approach that puts the user at the core of building technology and design, Mike focuses on creating extraordinary user experiences within the built environment. And you'll see that from some of the things I think he'll talk about today. I also want to introduce from California, Joseph Amador, the Managing Director, Amador Consulting. He's a seasoned expert in smart buildings, IoT, and energy, with more than 13 years of experience as a product manager at leading vendors like Johnson Controls. He's spent time as a sales engineer, a consultant at ICF. He currently provides independent consulting services for smart building vendors, building facility managers, real estate executives, and investors. Welcome, Joe. Thank you. And also with us, we have Susan Clark. Thank you, Susan, for joining. Susan is the research director at the Verdanic Smart Buildings practice. They have offices in London and New York. Her current research agenda focuses on software solutions for the real estate management, including integrated workplace management systems and IoT platforms for buildings. And her research expertise also includes a broad range of energy management technology and energy services. And I think that we're very lucky to have Susan here today. She's just completed a research on systems integrators, which she'll be sharing, with your folks. Peter Coleman. I'd like to introduce Peter Coleman, who's an award-winning designer whose career spans more than 25 years technology industry with a background in owning and managing IT companies and installing programmed advanced technology services. So Pete knows what it's like on both sides of the fence. He's recently moved to New York City. The last time I chatted with him, he was in a hard hat on a building site. And Pete is heading up the PTS Consulting Smart Workplace Strategy and Design team. And he's also a key member of the global PTS CTO office. He's currently working with some global tech giants to help them reimagine their workplace by leveraging smart technologies to enhance workplace activities and the user experience. So that's our panel today, so that you have a bit of background and that you have a way to position how they answer our questions, but they're here for you. And I get them first, and after we present some information, most of it will be in a discussion format, but we'll provide you with a transcript post-event so that you can have the opportunity to look at it closely. But from this information, what we're hoping to today is to give you an overall view of the smart building opportunity and a little bit about what's happening in the market. So this smart building topic is all about the disruption of the building industry. It's a disruption similar to the disruptions we've seen in other parts of our lives. It's analog moving to digital. It's people trying to find bigger and better ways to move ahead. And traditionally in the old building industry, everything was in silos. Everything was a separate entity working with its own separate set of standards and separate set of conditions that people had to be expert in particular areas. And the advantage of smart building is, of course, that with IP infrastructure, everything can go on one network, or in some cases, two networks, one for operation, one for the data side of things. But in any case, what happens is the ability to make a digital transformation is what's creating an opportunity for people to redefine their relationship with the building industry. And underlying all of this, it's very important to keep in mind that buildings are a business. They're stakeholders, and people don't do anything unless they make money or save money, and hopefully make the world a better place along the way. But it's a business, and it's business issues that are driving some of the biggest concerns in the smart building industry. Along with the business, we have certain technological introductions that are these innovations that are driving and adding and changing the landscape of the smart building, so fast that it's hard often to keep up to it. But driving forces, including everything from information, from the IP protocols to the 5G coming from the communication side, the ability to analyze big data, which also includes artificial intelligence. All of these main mega technologies are feeding into different parts of bringing the smart building industry all together on one IP infrastructure where people can have the opportunity to see everything on one dashboard if they'd like. I thought it was very interesting, given this is an AVIXA sponsored, power hour, that that from the AV industry, Randy Klein, CEO of Crestron, just a few days ago at the Crestron event, the Next 2020, was trying to define where Crestron is going in the future. And he says very clearly, we are a rooms, building, and enterprise business. That's the business we're in. And I think part of that is so important for people to remember is that it's, if you're in the business of the built environment, you have to be sensitive to what that built environment is going to be and how it's changing. And to some degree, if you're in the room business or if you're in the enterprise business, you're going to be in the building business side as well. And we hope that our session today, the first of 10 sessions, it's a very broad topic covering many aspects, but today we'll be giving you an overview and talking about systems integration. And we hope that that will lead to some of the other topics along the way. Before I get to the Verdantix research, what I'd like to do is just to offer the opportunity to the panel and to perhaps start with Joe to talk about the opportunity in the smart building market. Where is the action and what's happening, from your point of view, Joe?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Thank you, AVIXA, for having me and having the panel and organizing this. I think it's going to be a great discussion. For me, there's actually a lot of different market sizes. That's a good way to start at the top level, right? How big is this market? Where is it growing? One of them that I wrote a piece about recently, there's some data from McKinsey, and McKinsey has used other source data as well, but they were looking specifically at the controls market, building controls. And that to me is most interesting because in many cases, when you look at a building, when you look at the market, you have hardware, you have software, you have services. There are some cases where you have estimates of each of those individually. Sometimes it's all bundled together, but you also have a lot of legacy equipment, legacy services, and even legacy software. And then you also have next generation cloud connected, for example, software, hardware. And I don't think that everything is upgraded and totally recycled or renewed or replaced all at once. Even over time, you could argue in the future, we'll still have some traditional controls in buildings. And that was the point that this piece made. They estimated that right now the global controls market is around $75 billion. They estimated that it would grow by, or I think into 2025, to a little over 100 billion. But all of that growth was either specifically energy efficient or energy management type technologies in a building, or more growth actually connected controls. But still half that market, about 55 billion of that total $100 billion market in 2025 is traditional controls equipment. So these are building automation systems. These are actuators, actuators, sensors on the wall, for example. And I think that's just one estimate, right? There are other estimates. I wouldn't say I'm in a position to say one's right, one's wrong, but I think what we're definitely seeing, and what I definitely agree with, is we will have a lot of traditional equipment still in our buildings. We will have traditional services still in our buildings, but over time we will see more and more of what can be called the connected equipment, the connected systems. And that may be some type of overlay that is connecting to your old legacy equipment, but is giving you a cloud-based interface to view trends, view analytics, actually make operational changes, or even, I think where it'll get to is the building has some intelligence, or the cloud connected to the building has some intelligence that can actually optimize. So that's a little bit high level, but I think that's one area that I'm looking at in particular, though there are other areas, of course, of the smart building space.
Sure, that's the problem when we talk about smart building, is there's so much, it's so broad in so many areas. One of the things that's hard, Joe, I think, and everybody can chip in, but I think one of the things that's hard is I get flooded by emails offering me, smart building research, and each one has a different number, and they range from a 50 million market to a 250 million market. And of course, the problem is, what are they defining, in terms of the scope of the research? And you have to be very circumspect to pull out, what is of interest to you. And I think that this is, perhaps another way one should look at it, is my understanding is there are 52 million commercial buildings in America. And a large part of them are buildings that need to be converted to some degree to smart. And I think that this is an indication of some market size that is, very impressive for everybody.
Looking at, real quick, looking at number of buildings, I think the 52 million number is worldwide. I know in the US there's about 6 million, so that should match up. But yes, I think that looking at that opportunity, and in the US, we have a lot of square footage in a few big buildings. Think of commercial buildings in downtowns. You have many, many more. I think 95% of all commercial buildings, at least in the US, are under 50,000 square feet. So that would be a restaurant, a retail site, a small bank branch, small doctor's office, medical office, things like that. Small offices. There are actually a lot of small offices out there that you don't think of. But that's actually a very good way to look at the market. Just how many buildings are there? How many of them have some of these systems already?
And Pete, if I can draw upon you for a second, what are some of the things that you see, from your experience? As last time I talked to you, you had a hard hat on, you were going into a building site. What are some of the things that are driving the market, from your point of view?
Well, I think in relation to smart buildings, I think that it's smart workplaces that are starting to drive smart buildings. And I think we would all agree that there's not as many smart buildings as we like truly smart buildings that we would have hoped for by now. So I know at PTS, we've taken a different approach where we're focusing on smart workplaces and kind of turning it upside down. So we're trying to flip the demand. So by having smart workplaces, the idea there, or the concept there, is to actually then place pressure on the developers, the building owners, to create smart buildings. I know that when we were at the Smart Building Conference this year, on one of the panels that I was involved with, there was a number of developers in the room, and they were saying, we're not seeing a demand for it. We're not seeing the clients asking for smart buildings. So that's what I'm saying. If we start working with those clients and create smart workplaces, then hopefully that filters in and puts pressure on them. It's a little bit like Uber, you know, signing up all the drivers and having no riders. You've got to build up the demand. You've got to have the riders there as well, and the riders are those tenants. So we're working with a number of organizations, not just here in New York, but around the world, where we're helping them develop those standards and also design those smart workplaces.
And Mike, do you think that the opportunity in small buildings is in new buildings and in skyscraper, or from your angle, as a master systems integrator, what's the range of opportunity in terms of the buildings?
I think the range is huge, absolutely massive. So I think it's much easier to bring it into a greenfield site. And that tends to be that, people are looking to outstrip their competition. They want to have something that is latest and greatest, that they can market potentially with a higher service charge. I think that said, though, and with the kind of growing understanding of climate crisis, the need to be net carbon neutral by 2030, ideally, to stop warming at its current rate, there's a huge opportunity within retrofit. And actually, a lot of the opportunity in retrofit is finding efficient ways to understand what clients have already, so that you can integrate into those systems and make them more efficient. Unfortunately, some of that is often hampered by levels of documentation available, and quite often, we've had kind of corporate banking clients who have buildings that their lights are switched on 24 hours a day because no one understands how the lighting system works anymore, and no one knows how to turn them off, which, I mean, in this day and age feels completely ridiculous, but I think does shine a light on quite how A, archaic some of these systems are, but also B, that the market is very fragmented. And so oftentimes things can get lost in translation, people lose key individuals, and so that understanding can disappear with people if it hasn't been documented properly.
One of the things I like to underline, we've had this thing in the smart building business where we used to, on every conference, spend the first 30 minutes trying to define a smart building. And I think one of the problems in this is that it's like when you have a friend and you go, oh, this is a smart person. If I tell you that's a smart person, you don't necessarily know what type of smart I'm referring to. Is it emotional intelligence? Is it a person who's clever mechanically? Is it a person who's a professor type? So one of the problems with smart building is because it's an ongoing story, the legacy is there, and different buildings are at different stages, and buildings can be smart in different ways, and without reaching the peak of being the smart building that's held up. It can have can be smart individual ways along the way. I'd like to move on, if I could, because I'm very anxious to get to Susan's research and to show you some of the things that she's discovered. And I'm going to turn it over to Susan now to lead us through.
Great, thank you very much, Bob. So to add to today's discussion, I'm going to share a few trends that we've seen from some of our recent research on systems integrators for smart buildings. And actually what is happening in the systems integration market, I really see it being relevant for everyone right across the smart building ecosystem, whether you're an occupier, a software vendor, you're a developer. And that's because the vision for a high-performing building is very much based around the idea of many systems working together, often with a kind of key outcome in mind, such as improving occupant experience or operational efficiency. And for the recent research that Verdantix conducted, we interviewed many buyers right across the market. And we also interviewed a panel of experts across the sector, including Banti, who's on today's session. And if I wanted to kind of bring to you one of the top takeaways from this research, that was systems integrators really need to plan for a changing market. And through our research, we saw that the market is evolving across three main fronts. Firstly, we see that the digitization of buildings is driving a raft of new opportunities, particularly around implementing IoT technology stacks into buildings. And the second big trend, and I'll dig into these a little bit further in a moment, we're also seeing buyer demand changing. And the big trend and the big change is we're seeing new appetites for projects that improve occupant experience. And actually that's a really positive change in the sector, because it means that systems integrators can get involved in much more strategic projects. It's no longer just about bringing kit into buildings. It's about working towards this really strategic goal. And then the final trend that I will dig into a little bit in a moment is around the competitive landscape. We also see that changing as well. And the major change there is players in the market are broadening their capabilities to work across many technologies. Integrators are moving from working on a single technology to becoming multi-technology integrators. And clearly, master systems integrators are taking the leading role there. And with that, there's clearly opportunities as a systems integrator. You can pitch for some of the bigger and higher value projects, but also there's a few risks to manage, such as spreading yourselves too thin. So let's move to the next slide, and I'm going to dig into all of this a bit further. So as Bob actually mentioned it right at the start of today's session, one of the big changes for systems integrators has been the digitization of buildings. If we look at the evolution of buildings over the past 50 years, they've been containing an increasing number of data collection devices, smart systems, and IP-enabled systems. And this simply means more systems integration opportunities. Just to reiterate what a few of the panelists said, I mean, there's still a lot of old building stock out there that's not very smart. And in fact, the photo there of the old building is one of the old Verdantix offices, and that was certainly not a smart building. And much of this evolution is part of the IoT trends. Many in the sector are hopeful that the IoT will enable the next evolution in the management of buildings by providing building managers much more granular data and visibility into building operations. But to benefit from the IoT, we simply need new technology into buildings. And we often talk about the IoT technology stack. You need your sensors, you need your IoT connectivity layer, and then on top of that, there's a whole ecosystem of software apps for analytics. And it's this type of technology trend which has been drawing in some of the global IT services firms into the systems integration market. So we've seen firms like Accenture, Cognizant, and TCS establish smart building practices, and they're tapping into this opportunity of bringing data up from buildings into the cloud layer. So that's one big trend. If we move on to the next slide, I just thought I would talk through a few of the changes from the buyer side. And the slide I'm sharing here, it's actually pre-publication data, so you guys are getting a first look into it. We interviewed a panel of corporate facility and real estate managers. So this is kind of the occupier view that you're getting here. And what we've seen very clearly from our research is that demand is growing for systems integration projects that enhance workplace experience. And this reflects a trend that's been very clear from our research over the past couple of years, that real estate strategies are increasingly thinking about the building occupants. And that's because some executives are starting to make a link between experience and occupant productivity. Clearly, there's still questions there around kind of how true that is. And even in a COVID world, the focus on occupant experience is not going away. You will see many of the return to work strategies firms are putting in place are always thinking about the occupant. How can we make it safe for the occupant, and how can we make them feel confident when returning to the workplace? So let's dig into this data that I'm sharing with you on the screen. We interviewed 250 corporate heads of facilities and real estate globally, and we asked them across what technology categories are you planning to engage a consultant or an implementation firm. And you can see here 65% of firms are thinking about or planning to use a systems integrator to help them implement employee-facing apps. And interestingly, 31% of firms are looking to engage an implementer for workplace and room booking software. So that's a strong signal of demand. If we go across to the next slide, it's actually very interesting to see that from a technology solution lens and angle, that there's a new range of employee-facing technologies hitting the market. The slide I'm sharing with you is one of the Verdantic's technology roadmaps, where we plotted the market's maturity and business value of around 30 software solutions aimed at facilities optimization. And what's very interesting here is if we look into the launch and growth phase, that the solutions that are now coming into the market are becoming increasingly building user facing. And that's a big change. If we look back over 5 years ago, many of the software solutions in the market, maintenance software, CAFAM, IWMS, to name a few, they were really geared at aiding the roles of a facility professional. But now the theme is around bringing new control and new insights directly into the hands of the building occupant. And that's driving into some of the systems integration work that we're seeing. And I'd like to move on to the next slide, and this will be the final slide I will present, but it's on the competitive landscape. And I mentioned that this was another area in which we're seeing change. Through our research, we interviewed lots of people right across the systems integration landscape, and we identified 6 major types of systems integrator. Now, clearly, there will be some firms slightly falling outside of these categories, but we found that these 6 categories generally work. If we look across these categories, there's very different maturities of firm here. Some of the maturest types of systems integrator are building controls implementers. And actually, for some people in the market, when you talk about a systems implementer for a smart building, they initially think of a building controls implementer. But actually, the ecosystem is much broader and more expansive. I'd just like to kind of wrap up by kind of honing in on 2 of these segments, which we see being the most dynamic and fast moving. One of those is the category of master systems integrator. So clearly this is a very exciting category of systems integrator for the smart building market. These firms are taking a leading role in integrating IT and OT systems. And clearly that's very central for the vision of a smart building. The big trend we're seeing here is we're seeing many more firms, many more systems integrators reposition themselves as an MSI. And they're coming from many different backgrounds. Most of the MSIs that we came across from our research have come from a background in building controls, but we've also seen some very good systems integrators, MSIs out there from an AV or IT background. I'm sure we'll come on to this later, but bringing all systems together is not always straightforward, and we do see from the buy side, both in new construction and retrofit, people still buy technology in silos, and that can sometimes limit this vision for a fully connected building. And then just the final point I'll make on this is around the workplace systems integrator category. These are firms that are implementing workplace software solutions, whether that's IWMS or workplace apps that are aimed at the employee. I mentioned before that this is a bit of a hot market. We're seeing plenty of customer appetite in this area. And this has actually really drawn in many firms into this market, and it's getting competitive very quickly. We're seeing some of the big real estate consultants establish an offering here, the global IT services firms, some of the big four accounting firms, and more recently, some of the big FM services firms are also establishing offerings around workplace systems integration. So whilst it's, I mentioned it's an attractive market, at the same time, it's been getting very competitive. So that does put extra pressure on all vendors competing in this market to really kind of find their angle of differentiation and kind of really truly understand the best way to kind of tap into existing relationships. So that's it from me. I'd like to hand back to Bob now, who is going to pick up the discussion.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for sharing that information before it's publicly available, and we really appreciate your coming on with our Power Hour. Thank you. The one thing I want to point out in these categories of integrators is that if you're familiar, and some of our audience are probably from the IT industry. In the IT industry, they tend to divide the world into what they call an enterprise level, a mid-market level, and then small and medium business, and then micro business. And opportunities for systems integration, where you have large companies jumping in to provide, workplace solutions, they're looking to provide it for the people with 40,000 global employees. So big companies are systems integrating for big companies, but there are opportunities at all different levels in the market. And possibly, one of the things to point out is that a lot of these system building integrators, as traumatic as it is for somebody with experience and making a conference room and a meeting room, as traumatic as it is for them to get involved in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, you got to remember it's that complicated for the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning guy to take a look at video collaboration and go, oh my God, what am I doing here? So a lot of times companies partner up with one another, and there's opportunities to find partners and to find a way to work together with people because they have certain skills, you have certain skills. Before I turn to our own master systems integrator here in the panel, I wanted just to ask Joe, because Joe, I saw recently in one of your newsletters, you made a comment about the growing impact of master systems integrators.
Yeah, I think, Mike is a MSI and has a lot of experience here. I think my point is there are a lot of companies, as Susan said, that are starting to brand themselves as MSIs, going from a controls contractor to now connecting not just your building automation system and your HVAC system, but also extending into lighting, access control, maybe elevators. But I would also say there's a fair bit of confusion in the market when I speak to building operators or solution vendors. So I'm one of the types of companies I work with quite a bit are small startups who are, just as we're talking about smart building vendors, they might see master systems integrators as a potential channel to market for them. And there's a lot of confusion of who are the leading MSIs, what exactly do they do, what's the line between a systems integrator, which is a traditional service, and a master systems integrator. Part of that is just natural because this is a new market, this is a new category. 10 years ago, there wasn't that much interest or a lot of available technologies that could do it in a cost-effective way to connect these things together. So in some ways, it's good that we're now having the discussion about MSIs because that does move us ahead.
All right, and I'm going to move to the slide saying, how do master systems integrators differ from other building systems integrators? And as Susan pointed out, they integrate the domain expertise across IT and OT, and they advise clients on building management strategy, actually, and how to deploy solutions. they often have continuing support roles, and they can effectively act as an outsourced part of the facilities management. But Mike, I think we ought to turn to you at this point, because you're the man actually doing it out there. You've had a very good track record. I remember when you were starting up, and I'd like to hear from your point of view about the role of the master systems integrator.
Sure. So, I mean, I think you've covered it pretty well there, Bob. I think as a kind of real baseline, and I guess the differentiator between other systems integrators is that it's being underpinned by IT. If you haven't got that networking, cybersecurity kind of focus on things, stepping into that master systems integrator role is really difficult. And then on top of that, there's then also the understanding of software integration. So although there tends to be less involvement maybe at the passive layer, so things like structured cabling or actual physical cabling interconnects, once you're moving into the active layer in terms of equipment and then to the logical layer in terms of software, that's really where MSIs get super active. And I think it's also a breadth of experience. And I think this is also why there is the demand out there in the market now, is that actually people can't find the skills to get all of these different technologies integrated. And so, and I think actually Pete touched on this earlier in terms of looking at this from a fit out perspective, in terms of enabling smart workplaces is a great start point, because actually a lot of the systems are already there and commissioned. And if you're then fitting those out and working in them, you can build that experience in terms of getting used to how to work together. And also your point on partnering, there are likely to be specialists that are looking at those other systems so you can work together to make the integration happen. I think moreover, it's then moving to an understanding of kind of the architectures and how things go together. It's also grounding yourself in the property and construction industries. And I think our original baptism of fire when we did Birmingham Central Library was working with Carillion, who are a main contractor in the UK, who are sadly no more. But we were buried 5 levels deep, contracting into a data cabler who was contracting to someone else, contracting to someone else. So every pound that we put into the project, the taxpayer was paying £1.88 for our services. And we were walking around site wondering why everyone thought we were really expensive. But that kind of initial understanding of thinking about in the UK kind of REBA stages, so how buildings are constructed, what the key points of design and decision making are, they're also really essential when you're trying to get technology into a building. The property and construction industries are incredibly well established. They change at glacial pace. They are very disinterested in doing things that they have never done before. And so I think, naively as we did turning up as kind of eager beaver technologists that were going to save the world and make everything a smart building, that went down less well with some seasoned professionals in the property and construction world. So I think there is a lot here about kind of knowing your audience. And there's also the ability to educate people and take them on the journey. It's amazing the number of people who we work alongside in property and construction who, after a number of interactions, will kind of turn around to us and once we've kind of built a bit of trust and say, we really don't understand technology. And that's where we're always trying to be very reassuring that, we can help you, we can take you on that journey, we can explain things to you in plain English. As soon as you're into acronyms, technical jargon, geek speak, the glazed look comes over, the lights go out, and there's a good chance that you'll lose people quickly.
So I think just to add to that, I think it needs to be designed correctly from the start. I think that really helps, people like Mike and other master systems integrators, if these systems are designed by master systems designers who understand how these systems go together. And like Susan mentioned before, obviously, and also yourself, Bob, obviously a lot of these spaces are still designed in silos, but even there's silos within the silos. So even the technology piece, all the technologies are siloed as well. They're quite often they're turnkey solutions, where it's analytical sensors or room booking systems and things like that. And that's where there's another layer that comes in that Mike touched on before, was that there's this software layer, and that software layer touches all of those components, right? And normalizes that data and is able to provide useful information, outputs and outcomes to help, make everyone's life better and easier and more efficient, and all the things that go into the benefits of having a smart building and a smart workplace.
Which begets the question, when software is done eating the world, what's going to be left?
It's true.
I wanted to come back, Mike, to a slide that I borrowed from one of your presentations, and this is on the types of projects that are out there today. I thought you might want to take us through that so people can see what's happening.
Sure. So I think you touched right at the beginning that we're used to buying building services in silos, and typically they are contractual packages completely segmented from each other with, if you're lucky, maybe a tidbit around how it will integrate into other things, if someone is even thinking in that way. I think, going back to what I was saying, property and construction, doing what they've always done, getting what they've always got, will be procuring things in silos, and those silos will be things like access control, CCTV, building management systems, lighting systems, etc., etc. So showing that as a lighting system on the left, nice, easy, push button control, switch, turn your lights on and off, nothing smart there, no data coming out. It just makes some light when you push the light switch. When you move into a smart silo, and this is something that we've seen a lot, particularly in the consumer world. So if you think of things like Philips Hue, that's where you're starting to get this kind of gateway that sits in the middle between normally the device and the internet, and then there's some app that you can install onto a smartphone. But typically that's limited to the silo functionality. And in consumer land, you can now get an app for your heating, an app for your lighting, an app for your front door, et cetera, et cetera. None of that is integrated, and none of it leads to a great building user experience. Moving then across into smart building, and I've labeled this as data. This really comes from the kind of spectrum of different smart buildings that we're talking about. And I would say that this is very much from a kind of architectural topology type approach. This definitely isn't down in the appropriate level of detail to Pete's point. But to give you an idea, we're seeing specs that are out in the market now, which are almost solely focused on data extraction. And so what we're showing in the graphic there is you have devices that are all then connected to their respective area controllers or head ends that are then having data extracted from them, normally to do some kind of analytics, or potentially slightly more advanced, looking at things like digital twins. These tend to be, or some of the specs we have seen are so focused on data, they actually almost ignore the user experience completely. And so oftentimes, and again, this is a very kind of broad brushstroke, this is driven by landlords or speculative developers who are looking to understand how their building is performing. They are less interested in terms of smart workplace or how people are using spaces, what they're interacting with. It's just not on their radar. Moving then towards the experience side, this is where we start to kind of build up. So we're looking at the building user experience. We're looking at the different personas that are using the building. So we've touched on, facilities managers being different to the occupants, different to the visitors that are going into the building. And so we're using that traditional approach, so typically siloed still, but we're doing some level of integration through the software layer that gives us an element of control over those different systems that are within the building. And I think it's important to say here that in the pursuit of user experience, because you're implementing that control, the data almost comes along via proxy. And so our advice to people is always to look at the experience, because it's the most difficult thing to kind of craft and get together, and then you can get the data by default. Where we're starting to move to, and oddly for today, I am sat in a building that we've just concluded in this way, is starting to look at using multidisciplinary area controllers. And that can lead to an awful lot of efficiency when you're going through the construction or fit out phases of a project. And what you're starting to do there is use more generic area controllers to actually then control different things like lights, fan call units, AV equipment, etc. And what that can do is, rather than having all of those different contractors doing laps of the same building, plugging things into the same networks, and then commissioning all of their systems independently for integration to happen afterwards, is actually you can use consolidated area controllers to control everything in a space. So it means from a physical perspective, you can still use all of those specialist trades, but when you come to integrating them and actually connecting to them together, it can be a lot more straightforward. And then the onward route out to analytics and control applications, etc., is then layered on top. So that's really where we see the market today. We certainly don't see the demand side, even though all of the technology is there. And I think, as Joe was saying earlier, this is we're in an early market here. We're looking at early adopters, the kind of innovators on that technology adoption life cycle. We are yet to break through to the early and late majorities. And that is generally because property and construction is an industry that is full of first followers. So when people can see that it's been done properly previously and there's been benefit realized, that's when the investment will come out. And we've had people where, we've walked them round the smartest building in the UK. They loved it. They thought it was amazing. They came out and then said, show us 10 more. And we said, there aren't 10 more. And so their project didn't go ahead because they felt it was too early and they felt it was too much of a risk. Yeah. So I think I would be prepared for, just because it's technically possible doesn't mean, to your point earlier, Bob, that it would necessarily fit into people's budgets and they would see the value. But also that there may be some hesitance because actually this is new stuff. This is breaking new ground. And I think if you are entering into this space, you need to be in that educational mindset, helping people understand all the time, and also helping them try and de-risk what they want to achieve as their overall kind of goal and objective.
I think the risk, just to add something to what Mike said, the risk-averse nature of a lot of facility operators is a big headwind on the industry, in that if you're investing in smart building technologies, for example, in the process that Mike has just laid out, you may see higher upfront costs, but lower operational costs over time. That's a good thing, but you may also be concerned that occupant comfort may degrade, or there may be certain times or periods where occupants are uncomfortable. That alone, those points in time where you anticipate a potential for occupant discomfort, those are far more impactful than we've reduced our operating costs 5, 10, 20%. And additionally, in the way a lot of facility operators are actually incentivized, they want to reduce occupant discomfort, occupant problems, to the extent that that is far more impactful than an ongoing operational savings, which I think this will be resolved as we have more buildings that adopt these technologies. People will see, actually, there are no issues. The occupants love this. There's a lot of good data out there, but getting over that hump of having the 10 projects, as Mike described, to point to say, these are 10 facilities just like yours, and everyone's happy. They're happier, better retention, better occupant outcomes. We're still not quite there yet, I think.
And I think, just to extend that point, Joe, I think it's important that these buildings become active spaces, so they're constantly being updated, improved. I mean, just like a Tesla, you buy a Tesla and they release an update and you get more performance out of it. They adjust the algorithms and so on. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is that these smart buildings and smart workplaces, they get built, they get programmed, and then people walk away and they're left like that. And people move in and they're not either automatically adjusting or someone coming in and manually doing any adjustments. And all that smart, like you said, all the smart technology is there. It's not the technology. It's making sure that the building adapts to the occupant's needs. And as I said, it's living and breathing, and that these improvements are constantly being made and rolled out. So you're monitoring. So it's all about, of course, it's all about the user experience, monitoring what that is, and then rolling out updates on a constant basis to increase those comfort levels and experiences.
Exactly.
I like the Tesla analogy, Peter. Folks, we're coming, up to some time here where we have a few questions. So we want to just make sure we cover the last couple of points here. Some of the common pitfalls in avoiding in smart building. I mean, there are some obvious ones like overlooking the device lifecycle management. I think Peter kind of addressed that with the Tesla analogy. Not investing in multifunctional, repeatable infrastructure could be a pitfall, and downplaying the challenge of in-building connectivity, which is much worse than people would suspect. But would any of you like to comment on some of the common pitfalls and what goes wrong? Joe, I see you're eager here.
Well, I was just going to add the
make?
last one. Yeah, I'll be really quick. I think I've made a lot of comments, and I want others to have a chance as well. The downplaying of the in-building connectivity, that is, I'm sure Mike and I could probably spend an hour talking about all the specifics, and Mike, you probably have 2 hours for every hour I have, but that is a big issue. I think it's one trend I see. A lot of technology companies that have very good technology implementers, they may not understand all the complexities of building control systems, building data, getting the data out of the buildings. An open protocol isn't always open. There's definitely some shades of gray there. That one to me is also very difficult, because if you're implementing a smart building solution, you may go into a building that has not done a great job of organizing its data. You're held accountable for pulling in all of this data fairly or unfairly, and it may take months, it may take longer, and it can probably kill projects before they've really had a chance to get started. So that was the one that when I saw it, I was just nodding that it's a big one.
Thank you. Mike, you have 2 minutes. I'm sorry to put a restraint on you, but tell us, because this is something important, I think, from your side.
Yeah, so I think there's a really good graphic from memory that, and sorry to mention a competitor, Susan, but they did a neat graphic looking at the life cycle of different building attributes. So things like all the way from the structural elements through the facade, through mechanical electrical systems, all the way down to kind of device firmware. And I think that's a great reference point that maybe we could share a link to after this, that actually demonstrates and is a real good graphical tool that we use with end users to say, actually, if you are going to go down this route, and to Pete's point, this needs to be something that is optimized over time. And you should expect that there will be an operational cost that will come in 3 to 5 years when you need to start changing out technology. And no one wants to walk into a building where they kind of, roll their eyes and go, oh my God, this is so 2020. And then just very quickly on the connectivity point, I think we see a lot of people specifying protocols that have been popularized through IoT type applications, particularly things like MQTT, that actually, if you look at how most buildings are structured, are wholly inappropriate for the application. So MQTT is a telemetry protocol. It's designed to go over very poor or unreliable networks. And actually, in building networks, if they're having those sort of problems, they haven't been commissioned properly. And so we need to look at better real-time protocols that allow for status, health, and information messaging, as well as ideally moving to a point of being able to discover services. And the analogy I would use here is this is similar to someone coming along with a USB device, plugging it into a PC, it grabs the drivers and works first time. Building technology just not work in that way currently, but there are efforts to move it towards that point. But we need to be using and selecting protocols that allow for those kind of deployments to happen.
I have to move us along here, guys, and I think we're going to have to weave our pandemic changes into the answers, because we have a few questions. We want to make sure the audience gets the answers to that. But just to mention, 2.3 billion has been spent so far, invested in smart building during the pandemic on very specific changes and the new types of technology and applications that the market wants to see. And building lobbies are now the first line of defense. And we're spending far more attention on heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, especially filtering and bringing in more fresh air. And there is, of course, more consideration for touchless technology and increased needs for management in that. I think it'd be best if we move on to the questions, guys, because I see there are several questions. Well, we'll probably have to be short about it, but I'll read out questions and then you tell me which of you would like to answer them. But the first question from Stefan is, in many markets, there's a segregation of duties between traditional design and integration, like audio video. Given the role of the master systems integrator, is there also an evolving role for a master systems designer or master systems architect?
100%, without a doubt. I mean, like I said, it really starts at that design level. Like as good as Mike and his team may be, if he's coming in late into the project and things haven't been designed correctly, he's trying to play catch up. He's trying to get cables in. He's trying to connect devices that weren't designed to be talking. Like it creates more work and takes longer, costs more money, all those kinds of things. If it's designed correctly in the first place, the master systems integrator just walks in and makes it all happen and makes it all talk like they should. So I think it's absolutely critical that they're designed correctly by a master systems designer who understands all this and understands the connections between them all. The thing that drives me crazy here is we walk in and we're trying to push all this and we have pushback and saying, well, this is the way that we've always done it, right? So we, as consultants and designers, because we're getting in at the start of a project, we need to be pushing that barrow. We need to be pushing the point that this technology and the benefits of these technologies creating smart workplaces and smart buildings, how important that is. And then therefore everything just flows downstream from there.
I have 3 questions and 5 minutes left, folks. So I'm going to tackle the next one is, do you see creative agencies specializing in immersive technologies connecting people to data in the smart building sector? And I don't know how everyone else thinks, but I think that we've seen, certainly in the Smart Building Conference, a number of creative agencies, like our keynote last year, David Schwartz, who's really a creative agency who was specializing in helping the smart building communicate that it was smart to the people in the building. I don't know if there's any other comments quickly on that, but we have a couple more questions after that. Okay, moving on. What are yep. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, you're seeing a growth in phone-based occupant engagement apps. That's something others, I think, have kind of indirectly mentioned. It was in a couple slides. That, to me, is a little bit of a consumerization of smart building tech.
All right. And what are some of the open protocols being used in cutting-edge buildings?
gRPC.
Okay.
So you can move through from standard RESTful APIs, MQTT, like forget it. It's great for telemetry in terms of getting into control, doesn't work. REST APIs, then WebSockets, gRPC offers proper data streaming and control. That's what we're focused on.
All right, good. Any other answers before I read the next question?
I was just going to go back to the previous question, Bob. I think it's
Yeah, sure.
not so much creative people, but more, I mean, that is part of it, and presenting the data in a creative, usable way. But you get a lot of, sort of data scientists involved. We're actually knowing what to do with the data. We collected collecting the data is easy. Doing something with it, we tend not to do such a good job with that in general.
But I think a lot of creative agencies, are getting jobs and then looking for partners like ourselves, technology people that can help them execute in that. Okay, what are your thoughts on custom middleware program that can be an overall smart building meta control, using multiple open source building control systems for the various specification divisions?
It's the glue. It's the glue that makes it all happen.
The glue. Maybe you should mention SmartCore here, Mike, just to tell people what you're doing there.
I wasn't going to plug my Bob, but since you've done it,
I would like you to. Yep.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
All based on gRPC.
All right.
Will be open source very soon.
All right, something to look at, and we'll be talking about it in one of our later power hours.
And PlaceOS. Still with us, Bob?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we've got you, Bob.
You can.
What does GLPC stand for, by the way? question, Mike. What does it stand for?
It's gRPC, it's Google Remote Procedure Call. I'll put an answer in there.
Okay. And I agree with Pete, smart tech by default needs to evolve, not remain static, but how do we get people to understand this up front? I think we all wish we knew the answer to that question.
Get good consultants involved,
Anybody
Bob.
want to tackle it? Yeah, I think it's really a matter of finding the right types of people at this point in time and catching the evolution to, as like Mike and Pete, were explaining, that eventually more people will catch up to it. And I think certainly the pandemic has driven people to certain types of solutions that they're going to have to be looking for in buildings. And I think that this may, in the long run, actually get us an acceleration in that. We have exactly no minutes left, folks. So I think it's time to say goodbye to all the attendees and to thank you, our audience. And Marcella, would you like to send us back home?
Yes, thank you so much to all the speakers, and thank you listeners for joining today's webinar, Smart Buildings Power Hour, Opportunity and Market. This recording will be available on avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days, and your 1 RU credit will be applied to your transcripts within 5 to 7 business days. If you have any issues, please email webinars@avixa.org. And a huge thank you to Bob and guests for providing insights about today's driving forces, commercial and technological, and the impact of today's pandemic. We hope you enjoyed. Have a great day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you very
See
much.
you at the next Power Hour. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.